Attorney General, I also want to thank the families from New York who are here, who have been such strong advocates on this and so many other issues. We all deeply live with the losses that New York and the rest of the nation suffered in 2001. My first question relates to the practical matters of the trial in New York City. I spoke with Commissioner Ray Kelly yesterday about the strain that conducting trials in New York City will place on local law enforcement. Obviously, it's a large burden, which Commissioner Kelly willingly and Mayor Bloomberg willingly accept. Rough estimates of from the City of New York, which I received yesterday, place the added cost of moving the trials of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other terrorist suspects to New York somewhere in the ballpark of $75 million. That's a minimum. That's just for the year of the trial. The figure does not include costs of ramping up personnel, placing additional perimeter units around the courthouse and the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan, and other consistent demands that will be placed on our police force as soon as the detainees are physically transferred. As you can imagine, such a high-profile case involving such dangerous subjects will require substantial manpower for the necessary enhanced security. The city will require the following: police officers to establish a secure perimeter around Lower Manhattan. Many of those, obviously the hours are going to vary, and so there'll be overtime and other things like that. Police officers and equipment for demonstration areas and crowd control. Police officers to enhance security units for City Hall, for police headquarters, both of which are near the courthouse and the MCC, as well as for our bridges and transit systems. Increased traffic agents, aviation flyovers, sniper teams, and hazmat units. This list does not come from me, but from the police officer, the police commissioner in New York. Commissioner Kelly estimated, this is a rough estimation, at this early point, because I just asked him to do it yesterday, that as much as 90% of the additional outlays would need to go to overtime alone, because they're not going to be able to hire new police officers for all of this. All of this comes at a time when, of course, we compete, New York City does, for federal grants of the COPS hiring grant. We haven't received any money for that program last year. So I worry about safety first, obviously, but also the burden on the taxpayers of New York. And so in 1995, the City of New York was host to the trial of Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, the mastermind of the '93 bombing at the World Trade Center. And costs associated with that trial were fully reimbursed by the federal government. So my general question to you is, will you recommend to the President that he include in his budget dedicated funding to cover all of New York City's added security costs?
Yeah, I think that is fair. America was attacked on September the 11th. That attack was of national consequence. What we're doing is a national responsibility, and although the trial will be hosted in New York, it seems to me that New York should not bear the burden alone. This is a national.
So you will recommend, and I presume fight for these funds from OMB, which we know sometimes has other things on its mind.
With your help, I would.
You will have my full and undivided help. I just don't want. Sure. I mean, Mayor Bloomberg, the commissioner, they didn't make the decision, but they stepped up to the plate and willingly agreed. I don't think either they or New York City, New York State should be left hanging out there paying any of the costs of this. And I take it you fully agree with that.
I don't disagree with that at all, sir.
Okay, second question. And just one other thing on this. There may be other costs that we can't envision. And I take it we're not going to find somebody sort of trying to say, well, this wasn't in an original application or on an original, on an original request. I take it there'll be flexibility and generosity because of New York's generosity here.
You're going to be with me at OMB, yes?
I will be there, believe me, with you, or hopefully, gladly with you, rather than alone.
I look forward to working with you in that regard.
Okay, great. Next question is about the death penalty. As you know, because we discussed this back then, I was the primary author of the federal death penalty provisions for terrorists in the 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill. And you've already indicated you intend to seek the death penalty against Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and his cohorts, which I think is totally appropriate. Can you tell me if you currently see any legal impediments, that is, existing court cases? Because what we worry about here, and this happened in the military courts with Hamdan and other cases, that would stand in the way, provided all the proper procedures were followed, of seeking and imposing the death penalty.
No, when I made that statement, I did so on an informed basis and looked at what the potential impediments were, and I do not see any legal impediments to our seeking the death penalty. We will obviously have to convince a jury of 12 people that the death penalty is appropriate, but I don't see any legal impediments in that regard.
Right. My guess is a normal jury of 12 people would clearly see that, but we have a jury system and we trust it. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed expressed a desire in the tribunal to plead guilty. If he wants to plead guilty in federal court, and as you correctly point out, we have no knowledge that he still wants to do that and can't rely on the whims of him to make any decisions, but he waives his right to a jury trial for the penalty phase. Will you agree to that, to, for instance, avoid some of the theater that some people are justifiably worried about?
He certainly has the right to plead guilty, and if we are spared a trial and simply go to the penalty phase, that is something we would, I think, clearly agree to.
Thank you. One quick other question. I know my time is coming to an end. This is about Fort Hood and guns. Senator Feinstein talked about Lautenberg Law and others to prevent terrorists and people on the watch list from getting guns, and that makes sense. But there's another aspect here. There are restrictions on even notification. So, for instance, the people in one end of the justice system, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, were not notified when Major Hassan bought a gun. That's not talking about whether the law should allow it or not, but clearly there should be notification. Now, the tiered amendment, the 24 background check requirement, gets in the way of that. My question is, will the Justice Department remove the tiered 24-hour background check destruction requirement from its 2011 budget to allow the FBI to keep records of guns purchased by subjects of terrorist inquiries? I'm just limiting it to that issue, like Major Hassan.
The position of the administration is that there should be a basis for law enforcement to share information about gun purchases. Fully respect the Second Amendment, fully respect the Heller decision. It doesn't seem to us that this is inconsistent to allow law enforcement agencies to share that kind of that information and that kind of for that information to be retained and then to be shared by law enforcement. I
would just urge they write it into the budget that they're going to bring to us, the administration. It would be very important.
I believe it is, but I have to check. But I
Thank you.
It is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I was going to take a short break, but Senator Graham tells me he has a conflict, so why don't I yield to you, Senator Graham, and then after Senator Graham's questions, we'll take a very short break while we reconnoiter. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. I've quite frankly enjoyed working with you on this difficult topic, and I'm afraid we've reached different conclusions, but this is an important discussion for the American people to understand, you know, how this affects us now and in the future. The first thing I would like to make the public understand is that you're not suggesting if by some 1 in a million fluke one of these defendants were acquitted or given a short sentence that they would be released anywhere, are you?
No.
We would hold them as an enemy combatant.
No, as indicated to Senator, or as I should have indicated to Senator Cole when that question was initially asked of me, I think we have congressional restrictions on how these people would be treated in such a circumstance, so that, no, that would not be.
But the administration's position would be, and this is not going to happen, I'm here to tell you that I'm sure he will get convicted in federal court, but not because we're threatening the judge or the jury, but just because of the nature of the case. That's not really my concern about what happens to him, because he will get his day. He will meet justice. But in the future, if one of these terrorists were taken to federal court and somehow acquitted or given a short sentence and the administration still felt they presented a military threat to the country, you would have the legal authority to hold them as an enemy combatant, right?
I certainly think that under the regime that we are contemplating, the potential for detaining people under the laws of war, that ability, we would retain that ability.
Yes, so, and a shake behind